Okay, go.
Sige na, uy, mapaso ka pa aring napita. Yun. Nana sila? Di ba ko makita kayo? Naka-PowerPoint mo.
Okay na, ready na, ready na. Go.
Okay, go Mary. Ina na record na siya. Gusto ka na yung voice, Mary? Hindi ka manukan. Mag-start ako, Raya. Sige nga, go na. Si Ina pa. Yung naka-record na siya.
Go, go.
Sige na.
Start, start.
For document 3, excerpts from chapter 8 of results, annotations to further success still. The last Islas Filipinas vote notes number 18 to 26. On chapter 8 of results annotation of the Book of Marga de Census Islas Filipinas, Rizal wanted to tell us, especially for the Filipinos, that our country really existed even before the Spaniards came. Our native ancestors had their own government, rules, antiquity, beliefs, and customs. Morga states that throughout the island's writing is well developed through certain characters of signs resembling the Greek of Arabic, numbering 15 signs in all, three of which are vowels. The consonants are 12 with teeth and certain points on certain commas. Everything one desires to say can be expressed and spoken fully and easily, just like with our own Spanish alphabet. Rizal wanted to explain that without the things or created alphabet, our ancestors have their own or our own alphabet, proving that we were not illiterate as they thought we are. Dr. Jose Rizal also annotated that the same thing can be said today. The government in print and in words tries to educate the Filipinos, but in deed and at the bottom, it foments ignorance, placing education in the hands of the friars who are accused by Spaniards, Filipinos, and foreigners of wanting the brutalization of the country and by themselves prove it with their behavior and writing. Dr. Rizal's annotation could be classified as socio-political in the sense that the education and the system of our government at that time was his subject or interest. With his annotation, I could feel the message Rizal wanted to emphasize or point out. In my point of view, or opinion, his true feelings or ideas or of the brutally of the priors that he himself experienced together with his family members and his friends and to all the Filipino people during the Spanish rime is really expressed in that annotation. Dr. Serizan had also written this annotation long after he has completed his studies in Central. Serizal's remarks or annotations on Antonio de Morga's success in Las Islas Filipinas were straight to the point as he was an earnest speaker of the truth. He wanted to know exactly the condition of the Philippines when the Spaniards came ashore to the islands of the Philippines, pushing his theory that the country was economically self-sufficient and prosperous. They already have a culture on their own and have done numerous transactions and barter trades to numerous foreign. countries as well before the Spaniards came and introduced their own culture to them. Rizal first discovered Morga's book while he was in London at the British Museum's reading room. Upon discovering, he himself hand copied the whole 351 pages of the book and annotated every chapter that is included in the book. It was the first historical work on the Philippines done by a Filipino as well. It was the history with the point of view of the victim or the colonized, not the colonizer. The annotations that Rizal had made on the book was straightforward, correcting or clarifying every events or major impacts that have been either distorted or have been pushed to favor the side of the Spaniards. Jose Rizal's purpose on annotating Antonio Morga's work was to awaken the consciousness of the Filipinos regarding their glorious ways of the past, their almost forgotten history, and how they've come to be before the Spaniards arrived, to correct what has been distorted about the Philippines due to the Spanish invasion, to prove his fellow Filipinos that
Not
the Filipino
done.
before are already civilized and has advanced even before the arrival of the Spaniards to their country. Even having a culture of their own, having high literacy rate, is self-sufficient and has relations and businesses with other foreign countries. One of Rizal's annotations was the Filipinos were decimated, demoralized, exploited, and was destroyed and ruined by the Spanish colonization, and the state of the Philippines was entirely weak and in havoc compared it compared to its past version. Rizal even included the colonial history of the Philippines, being in prolonged periods of suffering that many people have been subjected to. The Philippines was depopulated, impoverished, and retorted, astounded by metaphor with no confidence in their past, still without faith in her present, and without faltering hope in the future, getting the feeling and the Filipinos at that time were in shock after what has happened in their country during the colonization of the Spaniards. For the document 4, excerpt from the chapter 8 of Rizal's annotation of Tumorgas Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas, notes number 120 to 130. Marriage among the natives are generally between principals and their fellow principals or nobles. Likewise, the Mawas marry among those of their own station, and the regular slaves also marry their fellow slaves, but sometimes they intermarry among different castes. The natives have one wife each, one whom a man may wed, and she is called the Inasawa, but behind her are the other women as friends. The, the children of the first wife were held to be the legitimate ones and full heirs of their parents, but the children of the other woman were not considered, but some of provision was usually made for them, but they would never receive inheritance. The groom was the one who contributed the dowry given by his parent, while the bride did not bring anything to the marriage community until she inherited in her own right from her parents. The solemnization of marriage consisted in the mutual agreement between the parents and the kinsmen of the contracting parties through the paying of the concerted dowry to the father of the bride, and in the gathering of all the relatives in the house of the bride's parents for the purpose of process upon proper hearing was before the relative of both parties and some elders who participated therein. The dowry was returned to the husband and it is called Vijitikaya as voluntary offering except in case where the separation was caused by the husband's fault. Dowry was retained for the parents of the wife to keep their property which and have been acquired by both spouses was divided between them in equal share, and each disposed of his part as best he or she desired. If any of the spouse had any gain or unknown to the not participated in the other spouse, it became the property in the former people could adopt any person in any presence of their relatives, and the adopt child or person would then deliver whatever he or she possessed as a present to the adopting party, upon which the adopt person would remain in the house and under the protection of the foster parents, thereby acquiring the right to inherit like the children of the adopting parents. Adultery was not punished physically, but instead the guilty spouse would pay to the aggrieved spouse such indemnity as the elder adjudged to be right, and which said parties agreed among themselves. The grievance was those forgiven, and the husband acknowledged be, as to be satisfied and retain his honor and resume his married life with his wife, and no mention would hereafter be made of the matter. In the matter of inheritance, all legitimate children will inherit equally all the property which the parents had acquired. However, if there was any personal or real property left by the parents in the absence of the legitimate children and by the asawa, they were inherited by the nearest relatives identified from the collateral branches of the main family tree. Rizal's annotation. This proved that the relation of these classes among themselves are not only far from resembling those of this master of the West and their servants, but they were even more cordial than those of the patrician and the Roman people, among whom at the beginning was forbidden to establish family ties through weddings. If the chiefs and the Mawa Filipinos have been tyran- tyrannical towards their inferior as they were respected to us in asawa, more correctly asawa consort. Another fruit of the benignity of the foresight of the laws, she brings nothing. This custom continued the union between the parents and their children, a wiser practice. What is followed in many parts of Europe, where cases of the children neglecting their parents once they have taken possession of the patrimony or of a parents who do not consent the parents of their children in order not to part with their property are found. In Europe, there can be seen sons who are richer and in more comfortable circumstances than their parents, and let months and years pass without seeing them. There are parents who are prepared their sons to be constricted than to be married. So which does not happen in the Philippines, not even now, because this custom survives. We say that this custom continues the union and not affection, because this is a sentiment that is always taken for granted. This affection in many people bordering on veneration, while the father or mother lives. The homes continues even though all the children are married and live apart. During in the Philippines, naturally the woman did not and does the European woman because if she is not burdened in generally sees increase in the husband's budget. In the Philippines, the woman does not fish for a husband, but she chooses a husband. The husband does not take the heavy burden or the matrimonial yoke, but a companion to him and to introduce economy in the irregular life of a bachelor. This theory, if it can be called those represented as compensation for the parents to the bride for the care of the education of their daughter, the Filipino woman never being a burden on anyone, neither on her parents nor her husband, but all of the contrary, represent a value for whose laws purpose was compensated. True that in our times parents consent with great difficulty to part from their daughter, yet it is almost never seen in the Philippines the sad spectacle that many European families present, who seem to be in a hurry to get rid of their marriageable daughters. Not infrequently, the mothers play a ridiculous role. The Tagalog wife is very respected. She manages and contract almost always with the husband's approval, who consult her about all his have. She is the keeper of the money. She is educated the children, half of whom belong to her. She is not a Chinese or a Muslim slaves who is bought sometimes from the parents, sometimes at the bazaar, in order to lock her up for the pleasure of the husband's or master. Nor the European woman who marries purchases the husband's liberty with the dowry, and her loses her name, rights, liberty, initiative, her true dominion, being limited to reign over the salon, to entertain guests, and to sit at the right side of her husband. Father at work say whoever that when they come to have children, they never separated anymore out of love for them. I think that certainly does not but and divorce in Europe. Bigay kaya means to intact to the spouses if the son-in-law was obedient to his parents-in-law, and if it's not, it was divided among all the heirs. Besides, the two members of the principal class uses to give some gifts to the parents and the relatives, even to the slaves according to the rank of the newly married. It seems more rational and more just than the challenge the adulterer of the often expose the husband as Coco eat batu, known as the cold and beaten. Other consideration aside, and there was no need for more. Okay, so for document 5, we have the excerpts from On the New Orthography of the Tagalog Language, Letter to My Countrymen in 1890. So, orthography is often defined simply as spelling, but a more precise explanation of the word is a study of the way languages represent their sounds. The alphabet, which we use for English, Filipino, and many other languages, is only one system. The Chinese use a logography, where each word represents both sounds and a graphic representation of the word's meaning. In the Philippines, there were several abugidas or baybayin systems with symbols that combine a consonant with a vowel, thus ba, be, or b, and or bo. Orthographies are important because they hold the key to written language. It is the system of writing that is so important for keeping a language alive and dynamic. We often forget that many of our Philippine languages are endangered because they are still unwritten or are underdeveloped when it comes to written literature. to the Spaniards' imposition of their orthography, which he felt was not conducive to learning, especially when it comes to reading. X, for example, used to represent age, thus Rojas pronounced Rojas. The Spanish J is what should sound as H, thus Rojas, and H, that's silent, which is why Unasan should more properly be read Unasan, much to the delight of our Kapampangan compatriots. Rizal was captivated by a Tagalog orthography proposed by Trinidad Pardonita Vera many years earlier. Rizal himself tried using this spelling system in a Tagalog translation he did of William Tell as well as Hans Christian Andersen's Fairy Tales for Children. In his last Noridadidad essay, Rizal pushed hard for the letter K, which was absent in the Spanish orthography and yet is so important in Tagalog. Because C and Q were used instead, the poor children had to learn to differentiate the sounds of kakekikoku and kwangwekikoku. It wasn't just a matter of facilitating reading and writing, but of learning grammar as well. His famous example was the past tense of katay or to kill. In the Spanish system, this had to be spelled quinatay with possible confusion in the way it should be pronounced. Having a K, he pointed out, would simplify the spelling to kinatay. Rizal started out his essay describing classrooms with miserable children being punished and crying for not learning to read with a confusing Spanish alphabet. To some extent, if you visit classrooms today in both public and private schools, reading classes continue to be an ordeal for the children and for teachers who think the children are slow learners. The problem is that there is little love of reading in the first place, and something reading advocates often forget. Writing is not something Filipino like to do either. Texting, yes, but not writing as in sitting and composing even a letter. Rizal was so wise in zeroing in on the need for an orthography that relates to what the Tagalogs were actually using. It wasn't just a matter of standardizing the representations of sounds, but also of capturing what Rizal felt was the spirit of a language. Not surprisingly, he wanted to promote the pre-colonial baybayin as well. Doing and teaching spelling has been a challenge in the Philippines. We've had the Abacada in 1940 to 1976, the Abiseche in 1977 to 1986, and now a Filipino alphabet. The latter two systems included English and Spanish letters, so we can spell out loan words. But a truly Filipino orthography must look too into how it might represent the wonderful cacophony of sounds to be found in our local languages, so we might all read more and write more about Filipinos and becoming Filipino. So for the document 6, Rizal's tribute to Blumentritt. Mr. Blumentritt, as an historian of Philippine Island, is one of these rare souls. Some write history to raise or to flatter the spirit of their nation, to depreciate or lower that that of their enemies. Others to support political, religious, or theoretical opinions with historical facts which they adapt to mutilate to suit their convenience. And others, our historian is a foreigner and writes in a country that revere, aspired to join to its crown and worn out pearl of the Orient. Mr. Blumentritt may perhaps be the first historian of the Philippines of this century who is not satisfied with merely being a copyist. His library is all Philippine works. On his desk lay treatises and memoirs. His portfolios are full of newspaper clippings, in all one of whom, a girl, bears a Spanish name, Dolores. He is in active correspondence with Spaniards and Filipinos who are seriously engaged in the study of the country. The numerous treatises of Mr. Blumentritt are considered authoritative by all because they are not dictated by a partisan spirit nor written for political ends. Neither optimism nor pessimism animates him, nor does he defy some to humble others. On the contrary, he always sees the welfare of the Philippines in union with Spain and the glory of Spain in broad and sensible liberal reforms. He knows that he is not sufficiently Hispanized for this, and he does not dream of glories because he is convinced that in Philippine gardens do not grow myrtles and great defect of treating the inhabitants of the country with certain consideration rather than a half-man or semi-brute. But for this he can be forgiven for the sake of other fine qualities he possesses, which are thorough instruction and a good education, apart from the fact that he is profound ethnographer. He has published and publishes many works, articles in scientific periodicals, vocabularies, maps, and others. Some of these works have been translated into Spanish, winning the approval of all who know the country well. So Lutherman's courageous and indefatigable commitment to the Filipino cause seems too incredible to the Spaniards as well as the Filipinos that many doubt in his existence or describe him as a front from the propagandist in exile, a version which perhaps was encouraged by the Spanish authorities, if not invented by them. Rizal is constantly torn between hopefulness and desperation, a split personality. The liberal intellectual thinker who does not hesitate to lay down laboriously the foundation which would lead his countrymen in some distant future to the goal. Lutherman trusted fully the willingness of the Spaniards for reforms, especially at the early stage of his friendships and correspondence with Rizal. Even Rizal was averse to the idea of separation of the Philippines from Spain and seeks a peaceful solution.
Okay, so for document 7, that is the Hymn to Labor, which is Himno al Trabajo, 1888. So this is about his poem. So this composition by Rizal, which was originally written in Spanish, in general speaks about how every Filipino is willing to work hard or labor for his country. So the next slides are going to have like a breakdown and meaning of each parts. So next. So the hymn to labor was written in response to a request from Rizal's comrades in Lipa, Batangas, who then were in need of a hymn to sing during the ceremony in honor of Lipa being declared a city in January 1888. More accurately then, this song is intended to praise the hard work and industry of the people of Lipa. So the first part is for the motherland in war, for the motherland in peace, will the Filipino keep watch? He will live until life will cease. So these four lines of verses comprise the chorus. So it signifies that every Filipino in his patriotism will keep a watchful yet loving eye on his country with equal passion at wartime and in times of peace. There will be no desertion, especially during the more difficult times in the country's history, even if it means he pays for his loyalty with his life. The next one is about the men. So the men was gonna say, now the east is glowing with light. Go to the field to till the land. For the labor of man sustains family, home, and motherland. Hard the land may turn to be, scorching the rays of the sun above. For the country, wife and children, all will be easy to our love. So the first stanza is sung by the men. This is the first of four societal groups identified in this hymn, which signifies that all members of society, without regard for gender, age, should uphold or honor their country. For the men, family and country are inspiration and motivation enough amidst exhausting labor. Farming has long been the main occupation of men in the country, especially during its early years. And this verse gives a nod of approval to farmers who wake before the sunrise to tend their land. They do it not for the money, but for what the income can do to benefit the greater good family, home, and motherland. The next is about the wife, so go to work with spirits high, for the wife keeps home faithfully, inculcates love in her children, for virtue, knowledge, and country. When the evening brings repose, on returning joy awaits you, and if fate is adverse, the wife shall know the task to continue. The role of a wife during the time of Rizal was plain and simple. She was the steward of the home, the mother of the children. Modern thinking might dispense premature reaction to this notion. However, it only takes a few lines to see that Rizal was, in fact, also a feminist ahead of his time. So this verse pays tributes to mothers who dedicate their lives to the rearing and upbringing of their children, teaching them the right values and morals to become upright citizens. Education and formation, after all, begin and end in the home. In the last two lines, it is evident that given the precarious nature of life in a time when war is imminent, wives may lose their husbands, and so they are capable hands to carry out the business of men in the context of home and family, should the men find themselves no longer able to do their duty. So for the maidens, hail, hail, praise to labor, of the country wealth and vigor, for a brow serene exalted, is her blood, life, and ardor. If some youth would show his love, labor his fate will sustain. Only a man who struggles and works will his offspring know to maintain. So the third verse is sung by maidens, so who salute to labor and encourage the young men to give their lives to hard work and industry for the good of the nation. This is supposed to be sung with joy and pride, signifying that no fair maiden wants a lazy young man who sits and waits for nothing all day long, but instead cheers for that youthful of valor and expresses her willingness to be that youth's wife on account of his spirit, not merely his looks. And then children. So teach us ye the laborious work to pursue your footsteps we wish. For tomorrow when country calls us, we may be able your task to finish. And on seeing us, the elders will say, look, they're worthy, if they're sires of yore. Incense does not honor the dead, as does a son with glory and valor. So it is apparent in Filipino culture then and now that children have high regard for the approval of their elders. So this verse underlines the importance of keeping the culture and tradition that is handed down to them from the previous generation, and that they in future will hand down to their own sons and daughters. It also expresses the children's wish to pursue the footsteps of those that have gone before them, in preparation for when the time comes for them to take charge, however premature and unexpected that time may be. What are you doing?
For the worksheet 1, compare and contrast. For the results view
Come in, I
and
charged my
Morgan's
camera.
view. For the results view, Philippine was not deserted and was actually habitable. In Morgan's view, Philippine was deserted and was indeed habitable.
Hmm?
Spaniards likely
Huh?
the other nation trade a food to which they are not accustomed or or is unknown to them with this just is fish that Mogna mentioned is bagoong salted and fermented fish. Beef and fish they know it best when it has salted to root and stink. Alodo is a very small fish which is kneaded and dried in the sun or air and cooked in the various way. Alolo is called salted and dried sardines. He said that Morga seems to refer to Tawalis of Batangas. He said that a house with the parents and children in a room together is called Bahandin. A house is called Pamamahay. Namamahay slaves still exist, but they are called kasama. They are partner of laborers. Namamahay are those who help build their master's house without compensation.
Okay, for worksheet 2, we have the essay. The question is, what are the major goals of Rizal in writing the annotations of Antonio Morga's Accesos de las Islas Filipinas? So the following are the three important goals of Rizal's annotation. Number one is awaken the unconsciousness of the Filipinos of their glorious way of the past. And number two is correct what has been distorted about the Philippines due to Spanish conquest. And last is prove that Filipinos are civilized even before the coming of the Spaniards.
Okay, so Morga's purpose in writing Successos was so he could chronicle the deeds achieved by our Spaniards in the discovery, conquest, and conversion of the Filipinos Islands, as well as various fortunes and that they have from time to time in the great kingdoms and among the pagan peoples surrounding the islands. However, there was a lacking issue with the scopes of his claims. Rizal argued that the conversion and conquest were not as widespread as portrayed, because the missionaries were only successful in conquering a portion of the population of certain islands.
For worksheet number 3, content analysis. The question is, what do you think is the meaning of Rizal's statement if the book successor succeeds to awaken your consciousness of our past already effaced from your memory and to rectify what has been falsified and slandered, then I have not worked in vain, and with this as a basis, however small it may be, we shall be able to study the future. In this statement, whose results meant that these works will be used as an instrument for the Filipinos to be conscious of our past and really understand the real events that had happened before. He wants his fellow Filipinos to be aware of their noble origin and the hardships of our ancestors through his work. In this way, the Filipino people would be able to understand the past and would be more knowledgeable about the present and the future.
So for the worksheet 4, reflection, discussed the points of Rizal in saying that the native populations in the archipelago were economically self-sufficient and thriving and culturally lively and colorful. So Rizal was an earnest a seeker of truth, and this marked him as a historian. He had a burning desire to know exactly the condition of the Philippines when the Spaniards came ashore to the islands. His theory was that the country was economically self-sufficient and prosperous, entertained the idea that it had a lively and vigorous community. He believed the conquest of Spaniards contributed in the part to the decline of the Philippines' rich tradition and culture. He then decided to undertake the annotation of Antonio Morga's Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. His personal friendship with Ferdinand Blumentritt provided the inspiration for doing a new edition of Morga's Successos, devoting 4 months research and writing and almost a year to get his manuscript published in Paris in January 1890. Rizal spent his entire stay in the city of London and the British Museum's reading room. Having found Morga's book, he laboriously hand-copied the whole 351 pages of the Successus. Rizal proceeded to annotate every chapter of the Successus.
Rizal comments that the Philippines of his time was no better than the pre-Hispanic Philippines. He said it could have developed on its own into something great. According to Rizal, Filipinos has a system of writing, an advanced knowledge of metallurgy, and a shipbuilding industry. Rizal knew that the Spaniards wouldn't learn with being barred in the Philippines. However, the word first critique in his friend Luchaman in his introduction for the book cited insight and ideological facts in a purely scholarly theory as a propaganda weapon. It was a 2 month prose and soon historical for Spanish. By crowd pre-Hispanic civilization, results Morga had said so for Philippine historiography and a Philippine identity. Rizal also annotated Morgan's typographical errors. He commented on every statement that he could deduce in Filipino cultural practices. For example, on the page 248, Morgan describes the culinary art of the ancient Filipinos by recording they preferred to eat salt fish which began to decompose and smell. Footnote of Rizal. Another preoccupation of the Spaniards, who, like any other nation in that matter of food, loathed that to which they are not accustomed or it is unknown to them. The fish that Morga mentioned does not taste better when in the beginning to rot. Three main propositions in Rizal's new edition of Morga's Successos. First, we have the Philippines had a culture of their own before the coming of the Spaniards. Second is we have the Philippines identity moralized even by the Spanish colonization. Third, the President or his past. Thank you.
Okay, okay, Rai, pwede ka mabalik sa first sa opening slide? Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for listening to our interpretation of Suceso de las Islas Filipinas. So, our interpretation was mostly about Rizal's annotations and how he saw his world during his time. So, thank you, everyone. God bless.